Meridian Blackthorn had always suspected that filling out Form 42B in purple ink instead of regulation blue would eventually come back to bite her. She just hadn't expected it to bite her quite this hard. Due to flagrant disregard for proper documentation protocols, announced Chancellor Vexthul, with the sort of pompous authority that only comes from having 17 different university degrees in advanced bureaucratic nonsense, you are hereby sentenced to indefinite exile on Kethmaran Prime. What? Meridian's voice echoed through the ridiculously oversized Galactic Council chamber, bouncing off walls decorated with what appeared to be either abstract art or the scattered remains of previous defendants. You're exiling me to a death world because I used the wrong color pen. The Chancellor's 3 eyes blinked in perfect synchronization, a feat that probably required years of practice and definitely too much free time. The regulations are quite clear, Miss Blackthorn. Purple ink indicates emergency status. Your parking violation form was not an emergency, but I was having a genuine crisis. My coffee had gone cold, and the parking meter was about to expire, and there was this really aggressive space pigeon. Silence! Chancellor Vexthul's tentacles wiggled with what Meridian had learned to recognize as bureaucratic ecstasy. The decision is final. Kethmaran Prime is a Class 15 death world, which means everything there will try to kill you in approximately, let me check my notes, 47 different ways. Meridian stared at him. 47? That's oddly specific. Well, 46 confirmed ways. We suspect there's a 47th, but the last survey team didn't survive long enough to file their report properly. Very inconsiderate of them, really. The transport ship that carried Meridian to her new home was called the Bureaucratic Nightmare, which she felt was either refreshingly honest or deeply concerning. The pilot, a cheerful fellow named Captain Drexmon, who had apparently lost his sanity somewhere around his 3rd millennium of government service, spent the entire journey explaining exactly why Kethmaran Prime was considered unsurvivable. "Oh, it's marvelous," he chirped, while dodging what appeared to be a meteor shower of flaming space debris. "The gravity is 3 times standard, the atmosphere is technically breathable, but tastes like expired milk mixed with regret, and the local wildlife includes something called a thornback megalith that's roughly the size of a small moon and has a terrible attitude." "Wonderful," Meridian muttered, watching the planet grow larger through the viewport. Kethmaran Prime looked like someone had taken a perfectly normal world and decided to paint it in shades of "oh, hell no." The purple storms raged across blood-red continents, while silver lightning split the amber sky in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "The best part," continued Captain Drexman with disturbing enthusiasm, "is that the planet's ecosystem is so hostile that even the plants have developed a taste for meat. There's this lovely little flower called a whisperbell that sings the most beautiful songs right before it tries to digest you alive." As they descended through the atmosphere, the ship began to shake like a paint mixer having an existential crisis. Through the static-filled communication system, they could hear what sounded suspiciously like roaring. "Oh, that's probably just the wind serpents," Captain Drexman explained casually. "Mile-long aerial predators with voices that can shatter reinforced steel. They're usually quite shy, though. Only attack things smaller than a mountain." Meridian watched a shape the size of a subway train undulate past their window, its crystalline scales catching the strange light of Kethmaran's 3 suns. "That thing is considered shy?" "Oh yes, you should see them when they're feeling confident." The landing was less of a controlled descent and more of a barely contained catastrophe. The ship touched down in what Captain Drexman generously called a clearing, but what looked more like a blast crater surrounded by trees that appeared to be actively plotting murder. "Well, this is your stop," he announced cheerfully, pressing a small device into her hands. "Emergency beacon. Press the red button if you die. If I die, how exactly am I supposed to press anything? Details, details. Good luck, and remember, The Council expects a full report on your death within 30 standard days, or they'll dock your posthumous pension." And with that encouraging farewell, Captain Drexman and the bureaucratic nightmare disappeared into the storm-torn sky, leaving Meridian Blackthorn alone on a world where literally everything wanted to kill her. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that makes you suddenly aware of your own heartbeat, your breathing, and the fact that you're standing on a planet where the statistical likelihood of survival is roughly equivalent to winning the galactic lottery while being struck by lightning during a solar eclipse. Meridian took her first proper look around. The landscape was a masterpiece of hostile design. If Salvador Dali had decided to collaborate with the universe's most sadistic architect, trees that looked like they were made of black glass twisted toward the amber sky, their branches ending in what appeared to be either fruit or suspended cocoons. She really, really hoped they were fruit. The ground beneath her feet was covered in what looked like perfectly normal grass, except that each blade seemed to be watching her with microscopic attention. When she shifted her weight, the grass rustled in a way that suggested it was taking notes. "Okay, Meridian," she muttered to herself. "You've survived 3 divorces, 2 tax audits, and that time you accidentally ate Blicktar cuisine at the embassy dinner. You can handle this." A sound like a church organ being fed through a wood chipper echoed across the landscape. Something with entirely too many legs scuttled behind one of the glass trees, and Meridian caught a glimpse of what appeared to be eyes. Lots of eyes. All of them looking at her with the sort of professional interest usually reserved for menu items. The emergency beacon in her hand suddenly beeped cheerfully and displayed a message. "Welcome to Kethmoran Prime. Current survival probability 0.0003%. Have a lovely day." 0.003%? Meridian stared at the device. "That's actually higher than I expected." The beacon beeped again. "Error. Calculation updated based on local conditions. Current survival probability 0.001%. Please update your will accordingly." A flower near her feet, a delicate, beautiful thing that looked like a cross between a rose and a crystalline sculpture, began to sing. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, like a lullaby composed by angels with a minor in soul-crushing despair. Meridian found herself taking a step toward it, drawn by the ethereal music, when her common sense kicked in with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. "Oh no!" she yelped, jumping backward. "You're one of those whisper bells, aren't you? Nice try, but I've heard this song before. It's called Dinner Music for Carnivorous Plants." The whisper bell's song changed to what sounded distinctly like a disappointed sigh, and its petals drooped in what appeared to be genuine sadness. "Don't give me that look," Meridian said firmly. "I know your game. Beautiful song, hypnotic melody, then chomp. Well, I've got news for you, buddy. I once survived a karaoke night with Blorthek the Tone Deaf. Your little serenade is nothing compared to his version of My Heart Will Go On." The plant seemed to consider this, then brightened up and began singing what sounded remarkably like My Heart Will Go On, except somehow more terrifying than Blorthak's version, which she had previously thought was physically impossible. Okay. Meridian held up her hands. "Point taken, but I'm still not coming over there." As if summoned by her voice, the forest around her began to wake up. Rustling sounds emerged from every direction, accompanied by clicks, hisses, growls, and what sounded suspiciously like something practicing scales on a xylophone made of bones. Meridian looked at her emergency beacon, which now read, "Current survival probability, 0.001%. Consider composing final words. May we suggest I should have used blue ink?" She tucked the device into her pocket and squared her shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, something roared with enough volume to make the ground shake and several of the glass trees crack ominously. "Right then," she said, addressing the hostile wilderness with the sort of determined cheerfulness that had gotten her through countless bureaucratic nightmares back in civilization. Let's see what you've got. The first rule of surviving on Kethmaran Prime, Meridian discovered approximately 17 minutes after being abandoned there, was to never trust anything that looked remotely safe, comfortable, or helpful. This revelation came to her while she was sitting on what appeared to be a perfectly normal rock, enjoying a moment of relative peace, when the rock suddenly sprouted teeth and tried to eat her left boot. "Oh, come on!" she shrieked, jumping up and glaring at the carnivorous boulder, which had the audacity to look sheepish about its failed ambush. "You're a rock. Rocks don't eat things." The rock made a sound that might have been an apology or possibly indigestion. A small sign popped out of its surface, written in what appeared to be 17 different languages. The only one Meridian could read was Standard Galactic, which helpfully informed her, "Mimic stone, diet, unwary travelers. Success rate 23%. Please do not feed." Please do not feed. Meridian stared at the sign. Who the hell is going around feeding carnivorous rocks? The rock pointed one of its newly sprouted appendages toward a nearby tree, where another sign hung at a jaunty angle: Kethmaran Prime Wildlife Preserve, sponsored by the Galactic Council Department of Cruel and Unusual Punishment. Remember, everything here will try to kill you. Have fun. Meridian felt her eye begin to twitch. They turned my exile into a tourist attraction? A rustling sound from above made her look up just in time to see something that looked like a cross between a butterfly and a helicopter blade descending toward her head with obvious malicious intent. She dove sideways, rolled behind the apologetic mimic stone, and watched as the creature buried itself 3 feet deep in the ground where she'd been standing. "Drill moth," she read from yet another helpful sign that had appeared nearby. "Feeds on bone marrow. Attracted to sudden movements and existential dread, please do not make sudden movements or contemplate the meaninglessness of existence while in designated drill moth areas." Designated drill moth areas? Meridian looked around wildly. The entire planet is a designated drill moth area. The drill moth extracted itself from the ground with a sound like a dental drill having a nervous breakdown, shook the dirt from its wings, and gave her what she could only interpret as a disappointed look before flying off to find someone with less developed survival instincts. Meridian's emergency beacon chose that moment to beep cheerfully. "Congratulations! You have survived your first encounter with local wildlife. Achievement unlocked, still breathing. Current survival probability updated to 0.02%. "Oh, wonderful," she muttered. "I've doubled my chances." She began walking, mostly because standing still seemed to attract things with an unhealthy interest in her internal organs. The landscape around her was a carnival of biological impossibilities. Trees that grew upside down hung from floating rocks. Flowers that appeared to be made of liquid mercury pooled and flowed along the ground, leaving trails that spelled out what looked suspiciously like dinner reservations. A sound like whale song crossed with a chainsaw echoed across the valley ahead. Meridian paused, consulted the nearest informational sign, which read, "Melodic predator, hunts by sound. Do not attempt to sing along. Last tourist who tried is now part of its collection." "Its collection?" Meridian's voice cracked slightly. "What kind of collection?" As if summoned by her question, the creature responsible for the whale chainsaw symphony emerged from behind a cluster of crystalline boulders. It was approximately the size of a city bus, covered in what appeared to be musical instruments that had been surgically grafted to its hide, and it was looking at her with the sort of intense interest usually reserved for rare musical scores. The creature opened what might generously be called a mouth, revealing rows of teeth that looked like they'd been carved from tuning forks, and began to sing. The song was beautiful, impossibly beautiful. Like every love ballad ever written, had been distilled into pure emotion, and then amplified through a sound system designed by angels with perfect pitch and questionable ethics. Meridian felt tears streaming down her face as the melody washed over her. She found herself taking a step forward, then another, drawn by the overwhelming beauty of the creature's voice. Then her practical side kicked in with all the subtlety of a fire alarm. "Oh, no, you don't!" she shouted, clapping her hands over her ears. "I've already had one singing thing try to eat me today. I'm not falling for this again." The melodic predator's song shifted to what sounded distinctly like a minor key of disappointment. It tilted its massive head and regarded her with something that might have been respect. Then it did something completely unexpected. It laughed. Not a roar, not a growl, not the sort of sound you'd expect from a creature that collected tourists like stamps. A genuine, delighted laugh that sounded remarkably human. "Well, I'll be damned," the creature said in perfectly clear standard galactic, its voice like a cello being played by someone with a PhD in making people feel comfortable. "A human with common sense! How refreshingly rare!" Meridian slowly lowered her hands from her ears. "You can talk? Of course I can talk. What do you think this is, some sort of primitive Deathworld where the local fauna consists entirely of mindless killing machines?" The creature paused thoughtfully. "Well, actually that's exactly what this is, but I'm something of an exception. The name's Resonance, by the way. And you, my dear, are the first exile in 3 centuries who hasn't immediately tried to pet me, feed me, or challenge me to a singing contest. People have challenged you to singing contests? Oh, yes. Terrible voices, most of them. I keep their vocal cords as trophies. Would you like to see? No, that's perfectly fine. I believe you." Resonance chuckled, a sound like wind chimes made of starlight. "Smart girl. I think I'm going to like you." Making friends with a creature that collected vocal cords as trophies was, Meridian reflected, probably not covered in any conventional social etiquette manual. But then again, conventional social etiquette had gotten her exiled for using purple ink, so perhaps it was time to try a different approach. "So, Resonance," she said carefully, "what exactly do you do when you're not terrifying tourists to death?" The massive creature shifted, its musical instruments chiming softly with the movement. "Oh, the usual. Compose symphonies, contemplate the meaninglessness of existence, try to find someone intelligent enough to have a decent conversation with. It gets terribly lonely being the only sentient predator on a planet full of mindless killing machines." "Only sentient predator?" Meridian raised an eyebrow. "Are you telling me everything else here is just acting on instinct?" "Well, not everything," Resonance admitted. "There's old Nash. He's got about as much intelligence as a particularly dim sandwich, but he tries his best. And the Whisper Bell Choir has some lovely discussions about philosophy, though they tend to get distracted when lunch walks by. As if summoned by their conversation, a sound like someone gargling gravel mixed with existential despair echoed from the nearby forest. Several trees promptly uprooted themselves and ran away. "Ah!" Resonance perked up considerably. "That would be old Nash now. Perfect timing." "Old Nash," Meridian repeated slowly. "The one with the intelligence of a sandwich?" "A particularly dim sandwich," Resonance corrected. "But he's got a heart of gold. Well, technically it's more of a heart of compressed diamond fused with the crystallized screams of his enemies, but the sentiment is the same." The source of the gargling sound emerged from the tree line, and Meridian immediately understood why everything else had fled. Old Nash was approximately the size of a small building, covered in what appeared to be armor plating made from the bones of things that had probably been much larger than buildings, and he had more teeth than seemed mathematically possible. He was also wearing what appeared to be a flower crown. "Resonance!" Old Nash bellowed, in a voice like an avalanche learning to speak. "I made pretty flowers. Look! They're beautiful, Nash." Resonance replied with genuine warmth. "Did you remember not to eat the roots this time?" "Only ate half the roots," Old Nash announced proudly. Other half still growing. Excellent progress. Now, I'd like you to meet our new friend, Meridian. She's a human. Old Nash's massive head swiveled toward Meridian, and she found herself looking into eyes the size of dinner plates that held all the intellectual complexity of particularly clear puddle water. But there was something else there too, a kind of innocent curiosity that was almost endearing. "Human!" Old Nash declared, with the sort of enthusiasm usually reserved for discovering free cake. "I heard of humans. You eat plants and make fire and do math." "Well, yes, that's surprisingly accurate, actually." "I tried to do math once," Old Nash continued excitedly. 2 + 2 equals... Purple." Meridian blinked. "Purple? He's colorblind," Resonance explained gently. "And also completely incapable of understanding abstract concepts, but he makes wonderful flower arrangements." Old Nash beamed, an expression that involved showing approximately 300 teeth simultaneously. "Human want flower crown? I make special?" Before Meridian could respond, Old Nash had bounded away with surprising grace for something the size of a geological formation, leaving behind footprints that immediately filled with what appeared to be lava. "He's not what I expected from a creature on a Deathworld," Meridian admitted. "Oh, he's absolutely lethal," Resonance assured her. "Last week he accidentally destroyed an entire mountain range while chasing a butterfly, but he felt terrible about it afterward and spent 3 days making memorial flowers for all the displaced rock slides." A new sound joined their conversation, a rhythmic clicking that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Meridian looked around nervously, but Resonance just sighed. That would be the Precision Collective. They're having another meeting about proper hunting techniques. Terribly boring, but they mean well. Precision Collective. Think of them as nature's accountants, with very sharp claws and an obsession with statistical analysis. The clicking resolved into what sounded distinctly like an argument, conducted entirely in mathematical equations. From the undergrowth emerged a group of creatures that looked like someone had crossed a spider with a calculator and then given the result, a law degree. Probability of successful hunt increases by 3.2% if we attack from the northeast, announced the largest of them in a voice like a calculator having an anxiety attack. "Objection!" clicked another. "Northeast approach reduces stealth coefficient by 7. 8%. Recommend southwestern vector with allowance for wind resistance." "Wind resistance is irrelevant. We are terrestrial predators." "Atmospheric conditions affect all movement. Basic physics." Meridian watched this exchange with growing fascination. "They're arguing about the most efficient way to hunt something?" "They argue about the most efficient way to do everything," Resonance explained. "Last month they spent 6 hours calculating the optimal angle for sleeping. They finally settled on 23.7 degrees, with a margin of error of plus or minus 0.3 degrees. The lead spider calculator noticed their conversation and skittered over with movements so precisely calculated they looked choreographed. "Greetings, unknown bipedal entity," it announced. "I am designated Unit 7 Prime of the Precision Collective. Your survival probability on this world is approximately 0.0002%. However, proximity to Resonance and Old Nash increases your odds to 0.008%. This represents a 300% improvement." "That's oddly encouraging," Meridian said. "We specialize in accurate statistical analysis. Would you like to hear our projection for tomorrow's weather? There is a 73.6% chance of acid rain with scattered meteor showers." Old Nash came thundering back, carrying what appeared to be an entire garden's worth of flowers, woven into a crown roughly the size of a small car tire. "Human flower crown," he announced proudly. "Only slightly poisonous." "Only slightly?" Meridian asked weakly. "Previous version was completely fatal," Unit 7 Prime helpfully added. "This represents a 45% reduction in lethality. Progress." As Meridian carefully accepted the massive flower crown, she realized something remarkable was happening. For the first time since arriving on this nightmare planet, she wasn't afraid. These creatures were dangerous, certainly, but they were also, well, they were people. Strange, deadly, mathematically obsessed people, but people nonetheless. "You know what?" she said, settling the flower crown on her head and trying not to think about the slightly poisonous part. "I think I'm starting to like this place." 3 weeks into her exile, Meridian had learned several important life lessons. First, never trust anything that glows in the dark unless you want to spend the night running from phosphorescent murder butterflies. Second, the Precision Collective's definition of slight chance of rain actually meant prepare for biblical flooding. And third, organizing a group of sentient apex predators was remarkably similar to managing a dysfunctional office, except with more tentacles and significantly higher mortality rates. "Absolutely not," she declared, standing on what used to be a large boulder, but was now serving as her makeshift podium. The boulder had volunteered for the job after she'd politely asked it to stop trying to eat her ankles every morning. "We are not having another debate about optimal teeth-sharpening schedules." Unit 7 Prime clicked disapprovingly. "But proper dental maintenance increases hunting efficiency by 12.4%. This is basic predator mathematics." "I don't care about predator mathematics," Meridian shot back. "Half of you spent yesterday arguing about whether 2 + 2 = 4 or the screaming void of infinite possibility. We need to focus on more important things." "Like what?" Old Nash asked, carefully adjusting the new flower crown he'd made that morning. This one was slightly smaller than the previous version and only mildly hallucinogenic. Meridian paused. That was actually a very good question. What were they focusing on? When she'd first started talking to these creatures, it had been purely for survival. But now, 3 weeks later, she found herself in the bizarre position of being the unofficial leader of what could generously be called the galaxy's most dangerous support group. Resonance, who had been composing what sounded like a funeral dirge for a particularly stubborn tree stump, looked up from his musical meditation. "Perhaps," he suggested in his velvet-smooth voice, "we might consider what we're actually trying to accomplish here." "Accomplish?" Unit 7 Prime's mechanical voice rose to what might have been excitement. "Are we establishing objectives? I love objectives. They're so measurable." "Well," Meridian said slowly, "I suppose we're trying to survive." "Survive what?" Old Nash asked, with the sort of innocent curiosity that reminded everyone why he'd accidentally flattened 3 mountain ranges. Before Meridian could answer, a new voice joined the conversation. It was a voice like silk being dragged across broken glass, with undertones of honey and arsenic. "Survive the inevitable return of the Galactic Council, perhaps?" Everyone turned to see a creature that had definitely not been there a moment before. It was roughly humanoid in shape, if humans were made of liquid shadow, and had a disturbing number of eyes that seemed to exist in dimensions not typically covered by standard geometry. "Oh, wonderful," Resonance sighed. "Shadow Whisper has decided to join us. How delightfully ominous." The creature that was apparently called Shadow Whisper flowed rather than walked across the clearing, leaving no footprints but somehow making the ground look apologetic for existing. "I have been observing," Shadow Whisper announced, its voice somehow coming from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "The human speaks of survival, but does she truly understand what she must survive?" "Enlighten us," Meridian said dryly. "I'm sure it's going to be wonderfully cheerful news." Shadow Whisper made a sound that might have been laughter, if laughter could be weaponized. "The Galactic Council has been discussing your situation. It seems your exile has become something of an embarrassment." "An embarrassment?" Unit 7 Prime's clicks became rapid and agitated. "Please specify parameters. Embarrassment to whom? In what context? What are the statistical implications?" "The Council expected you to die," Shadow Whisper explained with obvious relish. "Instead, you have created this." It gestured with appendages that weren't quite arms at the assembled group. A social gathering of apex predators. It's unprecedented. Old Nash brightened up. We're unprecedented. Does that mean we're special? Oh, you're special, all right, Meridian muttered. The question is, what kind of special? The kind that makes bureaucrats nervous, Shadow Whisper purred. They're sending an investigation team to determine why you haven't died yet. Apparently, someone in purple ink form 42B has never survived more than 72 hours on Kethmaran Prime. Meridian felt something cold settle in her stomach. An investigation team? When? 3 standard days. Maybe 4 if they stop to fill out the proper paperwork for entering a Class 15 Deathworld. Resonance struck a particularly dramatic chord on his organic instruments. Well, that's inconvenient. I suppose we'll have to kill them? Wait! Meridian held up her hands. We're not killing anyone. That's exactly what they expect us to do. Then what do you propose? Unit 7 Prime asked. Statistical analysis suggests that Galactic Council investigation teams have a 97.3% chance of recommending termination of anomalous situations. Meridian began pacing, which was always a dangerous activity on Kethmaran Prime since the ground had opinions about where you stepped. But something was crystallizing in her mind, a plan so audacious it might actually work. What if, she said slowly, we don't kill them? What if we impress them? The clearing fell silent except for the sound of Shadow Whisper's multi-layered laughter. Impress them? Old Nash repeated, his massive head tilting with genuine confusion. Like flower crowns. Not exactly like flower crowns, Meridian said, though she was beginning to suspect that flower crowns might actually be part of the solution. What if we showed them that we're not just surviving, we're thriving? What if we demonstrated that humans don't just adapt to impossible situations, we improve them? Unit 7. Prime's clicking became rapid and excited. Hypothesis. Human suggests converting threat into opportunity. Statistical probability of success. Calculating. Error. Insufficient data for meaningful analysis. That's the point. Meridian grinned, feeling the familiar thrill of a truly ridiculous plan coming together. They can't calculate our odds because nobody's ever tried this before. Resonance played a rising melodic phrase that sounded distinctly like hope mixed with impending chaos. My dear Meridian, I believe you're suggesting we prepare for war. Not war, Meridian corrected, her grin widening. Diplomacy. In the pristine halls of the Galactic Council headquarters, where the air was recycled to exactly 23.7 degrees Celsius and the lighting was calibrated to cause minimal eye strain while maximizing bureaucratic efficiency, Chancellor Vex Thul was having what could politely be called a spectacular nervous breakdown. 24 days! He shrieked, his 3 eyes blinking in a pattern that his personal physician had warned him was a clear sign of impending cardiac failure. She's been on Kethmaran Prime for 24 days. Assistant Sub-Chancellor Kriegthal, whose job description officially included absorbing blame for administrative disasters, nervously consulted his datapad. Sir, perhaps we should consider the possibility that our survival estimates were slightly inaccurate. Slightly inaccurate? Chancellor Vexathul's tentacles began performing what appeared to be an interpretive dance of pure rage. The longest anyone has survived on that nightmare world was 72 hours. That record was held by a Thraxian battle cyborg with titanium skin and a nuclear reactor for a heart. Yes, sir, but humans are known for their adaptability. Adaptability! The Chancellor's voice reached frequencies that made nearby crystal displays crack ominously. She was exiled for using purple ink. This was supposed to be a simple administrative execution disguised as due process. Kriegthal winced. He'd been the one to suggest the purple ink clause in Regulation 47B, thinking it would streamline the bureaucratic elimination of troublesome citizens. In hindsight, this may have been a mistake. Sir, he he ventured carefully. Perhaps we should send the investigation team as planned. Standard procedure calls for standard procedure, Chancellor Vexithul interrupted. Assumes the exile is dead. What do we do when they're not only alive, but apparently hosting dinner parties? This was, unfortunately, not an exaggeration. The surveillance satellites had been picking up some very disturbing readings from Kethmaran Prime. Energy signatures suggested large gatherings of the planet's apex predators, but instead of the expected feeding frenzies, the readings indicated what appeared to be organized social activities. "Sir," Kriegthol said, reading from his constantly updating reports, the latest satellite data indicates that several of the planet's most dangerous species are congregating in the same area without killing each other. The statistical probability of this occurring naturally is, "I don't want to hear about statistical probabilities." Chancellor Vexthul's voice had reached the sort of pitch usually reserved for emergency evacuation sirens. "I want to know why a human bureaucrat with a parking violation is apparently organizing the galaxy's most dangerous creatures into some sort of social club." At that moment, Senior Investigator Blacksmeron entered the chamber with the sort of confident stride that came from having survived 43 different hostile first contact situations and 2 tax audits. She was widely considered to be the Council's most competent field agent, which was why she was also widely considered to be completely insane. "You wanted to see me, Chancellor?" she asked, somehow managing to make her tone both respectful and vaguely threatening. "Investigator Blacksmeron." Chancellor Vexthul's relief was palpable. "Yes, perfect. You need to go to Kethmaran Prime immediately and determine why the Blackthorn human hasn't died yet." Blacksmeron raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "The survival estimates for Kethmaran Prime assume a maximum lifespan of 3 days for any exile. It's been 24 days. Either our data is wrong, or something very interesting is happening." "Interesting is not the word I would use," the Chancellor snapped. "Catastrophic might be more appropriate. If word gets out that exiles can not only survive on Class 15 Deathworlds, but actually thrive there, it could undermine the entire foundation of our judicial system." Blacksmeron considered this. "So, you want me to go there, assess the situation, and if necessary, eliminate the problem?" "Yes, no, maybe." Chancellor Vexthul's tentacles were now performing what appeared to be an entire ballet of confusion. "The problem is, we don't actually know what the problem is. The satellite data makes no sense. According to our readings, she's not just surviving, she's apparently teaching the local predators to sing." "To sing?" Blacksmeron's other eyebrow joined the first, in an expression of professional skepticism. "The melodic predator species has been detected producing harmonic frequencies consistent with choral arrangements." Assistant Sub-Chancellor Kriegthol read from his datapad with the sort of disbelief usually reserved for discovering that mathematics had suddenly stopped working. Blacksmeron was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the sort of thoughtful tone that experienced investigators used when they encountered something that defied all logical explanation. "Chancellor," she said carefully, "have you considered the possibility that we may have grossly underestimated this particular human?" "Underestimated her?" Chancellor Vexthul's voice cracked slightly. "She used purple ink on a parking violation form. How does one underestimate that?" "Well," Blacksmeron replied with the sort of dry humor that came from years of dealing with bureaucratic disasters, "apparently by assuming that someone capable of surviving 24 days on Kethmaran Prime would be stopped by something as trivial as proper form-filling procedures." The chamber fell silent, except for the gentle hum of air recyclers and the distant sound of Chancellor Vexthul's remaining sanity quietly packing its bags. "Investigator," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "I want you to take a full research team to Kethmaran Prime. Find out what's happening there, And for the love of all that's holy in 17 different solar systems, find out how to stop it before it spreads. Blacksmaran saluted with the sort of precision that suggested she was already planning for multiple contingencies, most of which probably involved explosives. Consider it done, sir. Though I should warn you, if a human really has managed to organize the apex predators of a Class 15 Deathworld into a functional social structure, we may be dealing with something far more dangerous than we initially thought. More dangerous? Chancellor Vexthal squeaked. What could be more dangerous than a Deathworld full of organized monsters? Blacksmaran smiled, and it wasn't a particularly comforting expression. A human with a plan. The Galactic Council investigation ship Reasonable Bureaucratic Response dropped out of hyperspace above Kethmaran Prime with all the subtlety of a tax audit arriving at a charity bake sale. Senior investigator Blacksmaran stood on the bridge, watching the swirling amber storms of the Deathworld below, and experienced what she would later describe as professional unease mixed with existential curiosity. Sensor readings, Lieutenant Kirkstall? She asked the ship's science officer, a being who resembled a cross between a very anxious octopus and a particularly advanced calculator. Ma'am, the readings are unprecedented. Lieutenant Kirkstall's voice carried the sort of excitement that scientists experienced when discovering something that would either revolutionize their field or get them committed to a psychiatric facility. I'm detecting organized activity patterns across 17 different apex predator species. Define organized activity, Blacksmaran said, though she suspected she wasn't going to like the answer. Well, ma'am, it appears they're gardening. Blacksmaran blinked slowly. I'm sorry, did you just say the apex predators of a Class 15 Deathworld are gardening? Flower gardening, specifically, and what appears to be recreational mathematics? Through the view screen, Blacksmaran could see geometric patterns carved into the landscape below, vast mathematical equations that stretched for kilometers, interspersed with what appeared to be flower beds, arranged in perfect musical notation. Ma'am, called out Communications Officer Thrillnecks, we're receiving a transmission from the surface. Put it through, Blacksmaran ordered, steeling herself for whatever fresh impossibility awaited her. The voice that came through the ship's speakers was cheerfully human, with undertones of someone who had clearly adapted to circumstances that should have been impossible. Galactic Council Ship, Reasonable Bureaucratic Response. This is Meridian Blackthorn, Director of Interspecies Relations for the Kethmaran Prime Peaceful Coexistence Initiative. Welcome to our little corner of organized chaos. Blacksmaran stared at the communications panel as if it had just announced its intention to run for political office. Director of what now? Oh, we've been expecting you. Meridian's voice continued with disturbing cheerfulness. The Precision Collective calculated your arrival time to within 17 minutes. Very impressive hyperspace navigation, by the way. Old Gnash was particularly excited about your approach vector. Who, Blacksmaran asked slowly, is Old Gnash? Our Minister of Floral Arrangements and Accidental Geological Restructuring. He's prepared a lovely welcome bouquet for your arrival, only mildly toxic this time. Lieutenant Kirkstall leaned over his instruments with growing alarm. Ma'am, I'm detecting massive life forms converging on the landing coordinates. Energy signatures suggest they're singing. As if to confirm this assessment, a sound began filtering through the ship's audio systems. It was hauntingly beautiful, a complex harmony that seemed to blend the voices of creatures that should have been physically incapable of producing music, let alone coordinating it into something resembling a celestial choir. That's our welcoming committee, Meridian explained cheerfully. Resonance has been working with the local Whisper Bell Choir to compose something special for the occasion. It's called Ode to Bureaucratic Efficiency in B-flat minor. Quite moving, really. Blacksmaran felt something she hadn't experienced in 43 hostile first contact situations, complete and utter bewilderment. Ms. Blackthorn, she said carefully, I need to inform you that you are in violation of Galactic Council Regulation 15-C, which states that exiles on Class 15 Deathworlds are expected to die within 72 hours. Oh, that old thing, Meridian laughed. Yes, we've been meaning to file a formal complaint about that regulation. The Precision Collective has run the numbers, and it turns out the survival projections were based on fundamentally flawed assumptions about human adaptability. Flawed assumptions? Blacksmeren's professional composure cracked slightly. The survival estimates were calculated by the finest statisticians in the galaxy. Well, yes, but they failed to account for the social dynamics of apex predator psychology, Meridian replied, as if this were the most obvious thing in the universe. It turns out that most of the creatures here aren't actually mindless killing machines. They're just terribly lonely and lacking proper social structure. Lieutenant Kuxtal looked up from his instruments with an expression of dawning horror. Ma'am, the energy readings suggest that the human has somehow established a functioning society down there. Not just functioning, came Meridian's voice, thriving. We've reduced intra-species violence by 73%, improved local ecosystem stability by 45%, and old Nash hasn't accidentally destroyed a mountain range in over 2 weeks. Blacksmeren felt her worldview beginning to fracture around the edges. Ms. Blackthorn, you do realize that you're supposed to be dead. Yes, well, that seemed terribly inefficient. Death has a very poor return on investment, don't you think? Instead, we've established the first interspecies cooperative in this sector. We're considering applying for official recognition as a new form of governmental structure. Governmental structure? Blacksmeren's voice reached frequencies that made several of her crew members wince. You can't just declare yourself a government. Why not? Meridian asked with genuine curiosity. The Galactic Council did it. Granted, you did it with more paperwork and fewer carnivorous flowers, but the principle is the same. Through the viewscreen, Blacksmeren could see creatures emerging from the alien landscape below. Massive, impossible beings that moved with purpose and coordination, all converging on what appeared to be a landing pad decorated with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Ma'am, whispered Communications Officer Thrillnecks, should we land? Blacksmeren looked at her crew, then at the impossible scene unfolding below, then at the regulations manual that was supposed to cover situations like this, but absolutely, definitely did not. Ms. Blackthorn, she said finally, I think we need to have a very serious conversation. Wonderful, came the reply. Shadow Whisper has prepared refreshments. Fair warning, though, the local cuisine is an acquired taste. And by acquired taste, I mean potentially lethal to most carbon-based life forms. But don't worry, we've developed excellent antidotes. As the reasonable bureaucratic response began its descent toward the most unreasonable situation in galactic history, Blacksmeren realized that her investigation report was going to require an entirely new classification system. The landing of the reasonable bureaucratic response was witnessed by what senior investigator Blacksmeren would later describe in her report as the most politely terrifying reception committee in galactic history. Old Nash had indeed prepared a welcome bouquet, a floral arrangement roughly the size of a small building that appeared to be humming softly to itself and occasionally dripping what looked suspiciously like liquid starlight. Welcome, galactic people, Old Nash bellowed with enough enthusiasm to crack several nearby rocks. I made special flowers. Only 3 of them are actively predatory. Blacksmeren descended the ship's ramp with the sort of careful dignity that came from 43 years of dealing with impossible situations, followed by her increasingly nervous crew. She was immediately greeted by Meridian Blackthorn, who looked remarkably healthy for someone who should have been digested by hostile wildlife weeks ago. Investigator Blacksmeren, Meridian approached with the sort of cheerful confidence usually reserved for people who hadn't recently organized an army of apex predators. So lovely to finally meet you in person. I've heard wonderful things about your work in the Zephyrian crisis. You've heard about my work? Blacksmith asked, momentarily thrown off balance. Oh yes, Shadow Whisper has excellent sources in galactic intelligence networks. Apparently, your handling of the quantum bureaucracy incident was considered a masterpiece of diplomatic problem-solving. As if summoned by its name, Shadow Whisper materialized from what appeared to be a patch of perfectly normal air, causing Lieutenant Cuxtall to make a sound like a calculator having an existential crisis. Investigator Blacksmith, Shadow Whisper purred in its silken broken glass voice, we have been anticipating your arrival with considerable interest. Your reputation for creative solutions precedes you. Creative solutions, Blacksmith repeated slowly. To what exactly? Why, to the fundamental problem of galactic civilization, of course, Meridian said brightly. The assumption that cooperation requires identical species parameters. Unit 7 Prime skittered forward, with movements so precisely calculated they looked choreographed. Statistical analysis indicates that 73.6% of galactic conflicts arise from interspecies communication failures, it announced. Our cooperative model has reduced such failures to 0.2%. Your cooperative model? Blacksmith felt like she was trying to solve a puzzle where someone kept changing the pieces while she wasn't looking. Oh, it's quite simple, really. Meridian gestured toward the assembled creatures with obvious pride. It turns out that most interspecies hostility stems from fundamental misunderstandings about motivations and capabilities. Once you establish proper communication protocols and mutual respect frameworks, even apex predators become remarkably civilized. To demonstrate this point, Resonance began playing what sounded like a welcoming fanfare, while several whisper bells provided harmonious backup vocals. The effect was so beautiful that Communications Officer Thrillnecks actually began to tear up. "This is impossible!" Blacksmith declared, though her voice carried more wonder than conviction. "You can't just domesticate an entire Deathworld. Domesticate!" Old Nash looked genuinely offended, which was terrifying, given that his facial expressions involved displaying approximately 400 teeth. "We are not domesticated. We are socially evolved." "Exactly," Meridian beamed. "We haven't changed what they are. We've simply provided a framework for what they could become. It's the difference between suppression and actualization." Shadow Whisper flowed closer to Blacksmith, with movements that suggested it existed in more dimensions than standard physics typically allowed. "The human speaks truth, Investigator. For centuries, we have been classified as mindless killing machines by your Galactic Council. But mindless creatures do not compose symphonies, calculate optimal garden arrangements, or engage in philosophical discussions about the nature of existence." "You engage in philosophical discussions," Lieutenant Cuxtall squeaked. "Extensively," Unit 7 Prime confirmed. Yesterday's topic was the statistical probability of free will versus deterministic universe models. Very stimulating debate. Blacksmith felt reality doing something that reality wasn't supposed to do, namely reorganizing itself around principles that made absolutely no sense, according to everything she'd ever learned about how the universe worked. "Ms. Blackthorn," she said carefully, "what exactly are you proposing here?" "Oh, I'm not proposing anything," Meridian replied with cheerful innocence. "I'm simply demonstrating that the Galactic Council's fundamental assumptions about civilization versus barbarism might be slightly outdated. Outdated by approximately 4,000 years, Unit 7 Prime added helpfully. Statistical analysis of galactic policy indicates a persistent failure to account for adaptive evolution in supposedly primitive species. Resonance struck a particularly dramatic chord. What she's really demonstrating, dear investigator, is that your entire governmental structure is based on the assumption that intelligence and cooperation are limited to species that fill out forms correctly. And that, Shadow Whisper added with obvious relish, is a fundamentally flawed premise. Black Smerron looked around at the impossible scene surrounding her. Creatures that should have been tearing each other apart were engaged in what appeared to be collaborative construction projects. Mathematical equations were being carved into the landscape by beings that supposedly had no concept of abstract thought. And at the center of it all was a human who had been exiled for using the wrong color ink. "This is," she began, then stopped, realizing that she had no adequate words for what this was. "Unprecedented," Old Nash suggested helpfully. "I learned that word yesterday. It means really quite surprising. It means," Meridian said quietly, "that maybe it's time for the Galactic Council to consider that they might not know everything about how civilization works." Black Smerron stared at her for a long moment, then at the creatures surrounding them, then at her crew, who were looking at her with expressions that suggested they were hoping she had some sort of plan for dealing with this situation. The problem was, she was beginning to suspect that the only reasonable response to this situation was to admit that reasonable might not be the right word anymore. "Ms. Blackthorne," she said finally, "I think we need to discuss the possibility of renegotiating some fundamental assumptions." 6 months later, Chancellor Vexthul sat in his pristine office, staring at a report that had fundamentally altered his understanding of reality, governance, and the proper use of office supplies. The document, officially titled Comprehensive Analysis of the Kethmoran Prime Cooperative Governmental Model, had been written by senior investigator Black Smerron in collaboration with what the report described as 17 apex predators with advanced degrees in applied philosophy. "She's done what now?" he asked Assistant Sub-Chancellor Kriegthal, who had developed a nervous twitch that made his left antenna quiver at irregular intervals. "According to the report, sir, she's established the first interspecies cooperative democracy in galactic history. They've elected her as their first Prime Minister by unanimous vote, including the votes of creatures that technically don't have vocal cords." Chancellor Vexthul's three eyes performed their increasingly familiar dance of impending madness. "And the Galactic Council's response to this impossibility? Well, sir, that's where it gets complicated. The Kethmoran Prime Cooperative has formally applied for recognition as a sovereign governmental entity. They've submitted all the proper paperwork, in the correct ink colors, with appropriate filing fees, and they've included a comprehensive economic development plan." The Chancellor stared at the stack of documents on his desk. Each form was filled out with meticulous precision, every signature properly notarized, every regulation carefully followed. It was, he had to admit, the most perfectly executed bureaucratic application he'd ever seen. "They've also," Kriegthal continued nervously, "included a formal complaint about Regulation 15C, supported by statistical analysis that proves Deathworld survival rates have been artificially suppressed by inadequate social support systems." "Social support systems!" Chancellor Vexthul's voice reached frequencies that made his office windows vibrate ominously. "On a Deathworld?" "Yes, sir. According to Unit 7 Prime's calculations, proper interspecies cooperation increases survival rates by approximately 47,000%. They've included 17 pages of mathematical proofs. At that moment, the office's communication system chimed with the sort of cheerful electronic tone that usually preceded either very good news or absolutely catastrophic disasters. "Chancellor Vexthul," came Meridian's voice, now carrying the sort of confident authority that came from successfully organizing creatures that could accidentally flatten mountain ranges. "I hope you're having a lovely day. I'm calling to inform you that the Kethmoran Prime Cooperative has received formal diplomatic recognition from the Andromedan Collective, the Spiral Arm Federation, and the Independent Worlds Alliance. The Chancellor made a sound like air escaping from a punctured bureaucrat. They what? Oh, yes. Apparently, our economic model has attracted considerable interest from other governmental entities. The Andromedans are particularly excited about our approach to sustainable resource management. Did you know that when thornback megaliths are properly motivated, they can process toxic waste into fertilizer at a rate of 37 tons per hour? What? Processing toxic waste? It's quite remarkable, really. Shadow Whisper discovered that most of our so-called environmental hazards are actually just misunderstood recycling opportunities. We've already contracted with 6 different systems to handle their waste management needs. Chancellor Vexthul felt something inside his mind make a small, decisive snapping sound. "Ms. Blackthorne," he said with the sort of calm that preceded either enlightenment or complete psychological collapse, "are you telling me that you've turned a Class 15 Deathworld into a waste processing facility? Among other things, we're also the sector's leading producer of artisanal mathematical equations, harmonically enhanced agricultural products, and what old Nash calls accidentally beautiful landscape modifications. Our tourism industry is booming." "Tourism!" The word emerged as a strangled whisper. "Oh yes, vacation with apex predators has become quite the fashionable experience. We've had to establish a waiting list. Resonance has composed a whole series of relaxing melodies for interspecies harmony, and the Precision Collective offers workshops on applied statistics for personal growth." Kriegstall leaned over and whispered something that sounded suspiciously like, "The waiting list currently has over 3 million names on it, sir." Chancellor Vexthul stared at the communication device as if it had just announced its intention to run for galactic president. "Ms. Blackthorne, what do you want from the Galactic Council?" "Want?" Meridian sounded genuinely surprised. "Oh, nothing at all. We're quite self-sufficient now, though we would appreciate it if you could update your regulations to reflect the actual survival rates on so-called death worlds. But your current statistics are terribly outdated." "Outdated," the Chancellor repeated numbly. "Quite. We've proven that with proper social frameworks, even the most hostile environments can become thriving communities. In fact, we're currently consulting with several other Class 15 worlds about implementing similar cooperative models." Chancellor Vexthul felt the last vestiges of his old worldview crumble into dust. "Several other—" "You're consulting." "Oh yes, it turns out that once you establish successful interspecies cooperation protocols, the model is remarkably scalable. We estimate that within 5 years, the entire concept of uninhabitable death worlds will be completely obsolete." There was a long silence in the Chancellor's office, broken only by the sound of Kriegthal's nervous antenna twitching and what might have been the distant sound of bureaucratic certainty collapsing. "Ms. Blackthorne," Chancellor Vexthul said finally, "I believe I owe you an apology." "Oh, don't worry about it," Meridian replied cheerfully. "After all, if you hadn't exiled me for using purple ink, none of this would have happened. Sometimes the most catastrophic bureaucratic mistakes lead to the most wonderful discoveries." As the communication ended, Chancellor Vexthul sat in his pristine office, surrounded by regulations that no longer made sense, and procedures that had been rendered completely irrelevant by a human who had committed the ultimate bureaucratic sin. She had proven that the system was wrong. "Sir," Kriegthal ventured carefully, "what do we do now?" Chancellor Vexthul looked at the stack of perfectly filed applications on his desk, then at the reports describing impossible societies thriving in impossible places, then at the emergency communication device that would connect him directly to the Galactic Council's highest authorities. "We learn," he said quietly. "We adapt. And we pray that the next human who uses purple ink has slightly less transformative ideas about social organization." Outside his office window, he could see the lights of 1,000 worlds, each governed by regulations that had just become as obsolete as the idea that apex predators couldn't organize bake sales. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all.